G'day, welcome back to Bite-Sized Bhagavad Gita with Sadhu. This is video 5 of chapter 4, the Bite-Sized Bhagavad Gita. This chapter is entitled Transcendental Knowledge. Wow, we got the Hari Prasad Kaurisa Song of the River in the background. What a beautiful cue. Thank you. Transcendental Knowledge. This chapter appears as either Jnana Yoga or Transcendental Yoga or Transcendental Knowledge, or depending on the edition of your Bhagavad Gita. I am referencing from 3, as you can see. This one was introduced a couple of weeks ago. The Bhagavad Gita as it is, with the old translation by His Divine Grace Prabhupada, the leader of the Krishna consciousness movement, and the Gita and Right Life, which is Swadharma. This is a really good book. This one is actually picked up from Nepal, from the Shivapuri mountains. This bloke lived to 110 years old and traveled the world. And here you can see the back of the Annapurna mountains, where I spent some time myself. Shivapuri Baba from Shivapuri mountain. He gives a great translation of the Gita as a question and answer kind of thing with a reporter from the 80s. Anyways, it's good to cross-reference, so we can get like the element, the essence from all these teachings. Transcendental Knowledge, chapter 4, it begins. So this chapter appears in between 2 Karma Yoga chapters. The reason for this, what I've sort of deduced, is a new awareness coming into Karma Yoga. Okay? So, the Bhagavad Gita, as I've described earlier, is the Song of God. It's the Hindu Bible. It's the big epic, small piece from the Mahabharata. And it's a holy book, but it's also a practical guide to yoga, how to create union and find peace within oneself, as given by the instruction of Krishna. It isn't like and God said, let there be light. Then the word came forth, Trust me, it isn't as epic as that with horns and flags and everything, but it's a bit more, how can one say, there's a nice progression into the core essential teachings, it's maintained so well of all these centuries, all these thousands of millennia have gone by. And Krishna was Arjuna's friend, his cousin. And he gave him teachings like any friends would. And he also had an air of humility about him for the sake of sort of laying forth what all teachers who are maintaining this disciplic succession should aspire toward. So what is really developed in the Bhagavad Gita in terms of Arjuna's perception, not being able to stand and fight for himself, at this point an attitude is developed, a kind of sentimentality, a perspective is put in motion. So Krishna has talked about Karma Yoga, this is how we find our place in the world, and then the transcendental knowledge is then given as like a take this with you kind of thing, and it's sadhana, it's sanatana dharma, it's the eternal teaching. Krishna, he appears time and time again, actually Vishnu appears time and time again as a kind of bringing forth of the dharma in times when it's gone disappearing. So that is the kind of attitude that one has to approach the Bhagavad Gita with, right? Because, Krishna talking about Karma Yoga isn't the appearance of one, coming along as a supervisor, a project supervisor, saying this is how one should do work and this is what needs to be done and this is what one should avoid. In fact, the way he came along was actually to remind everybody that the culmination of any practice of work is transcendental. Okay, you can't imagine any boss kind of saying that to you. Maybe in these days, I haven't been employed personally for a long time, that could be the case, but he gets the ball rolling in terms of like, forget about attaining material goods. Just forget it completely, wipe it clean. There is something beyond that, okay? But if you do wish to attain these material goods, which are unavoidable at times, remember that they're an offering to me because they have come from me in the first place, right? So it's the attitude of gratitude. This is what Krishna cultivates within Arjuna. And how does he do so? By remaining free of envy, being equal in success and failure. One becomes untangled. And through this, as a practice, it's not an instant flash of lightning, the knowledge of what binds one begins to dawn to the forefront. So one takes that glorious step forth, knowing what is good and what is bad, through direct experience, rather than the Bible said so kind of thing. The inaction, right? It's just like doing what is natural, because what is natural is good. The Chinese call this the Wu Wei. So yeah, the culmination of work is transcendental knowledge. An important part to notice in the receiving of transcendental knowledge, actually fruit that has been given or received is actually not to be avoided. You understand? It's kind of like to avoid is to be attached as well. I'll talk about that a little later in the video, okay? Right, so the attitude is harnessed and karma yoga has been put in motion. Transcendental knowledge is explained. How one achieves transcendental knowledge, there are many different ways. Sacrifice always involves sacrifice. The sacrifice of food, the sacrificing one's own meal, renunciations of various different types, extraneous body work, the traditional yogi lying on a bed of nails, pictured like that. Some even renounce their breath, renouncing the breath to the present moment, to the fire of reality, okay? These are all good ways. These are all ways that can spawn transcendental knowledge of what is eternal, and the urge to renounce the fruit is what renders the work eternal, the sanatana dharma. But it's not just like a matter of, I'm going to become a yogi and I'm going to renounce my breath. Okay, yeah, I'm renouncing my breath. I'm just breathing all the time, and that's my sadhana. It's not possible, because one has to maintain that kind of knowledge that, okay, good, you're getting fruits, you might get a bit of popularity. If you go to India, you see this all the time. Without that kind of mentality that the fruit that this produces is to be given, then essentially it's a waste of time. It generates not bad karma, not good karma, just akarma, just like time wasting. And so Krishna pretty much says that whatever you choose to do in terms of sacrifice for me, you have to remember that you have to remember me, it's like this. And Krishna comes time and time again to remind Arjuna of the disciplic chain of succession that this has come from. He appeared as Rama, he appeared as the dwarf who carried the whole world. That was another one. Many different times throughout the yugas, he comes time and time again just to remind us that there is a reality beyond what is physically present, and if we fall victim of the physical presence, even in the yogic spiritual path, there are many traps. And so he came this time because I am your friend and you're my devotee. He awards his devotees fruits of his actions. Arjuna has doubts, and this is understandable. Krishna in humility even says, find a guru you can learn from. And in the very next verse says, so having found a guru you can learn from, you'll begin to understand how this can be put in motion, and that you shouldn't be relying too much upon the guru either. He was the one who put the planets in motion. He taught the dharma to the sun god. But then Arjuna was like, how could you have done that if the sun is thousands of years old? Krishna again breaks the ice and says, look, this isn't what it seems, we've done this time and time again. You can't remember, but I can. And when I came back, the sun shone upon the Dharma once again. It's the path of the Buddha, essentially, what is being put forth. One could say that was the bold arrow of time echoing through the millennia. The path of Siddhartha Buddha, because in his wavering from A to B to A to B with the knowledge of the Vedas, who Krishna as Vishnu expounded, and then comes again in the Bhagavad Gita, which the Buddha took on board from extreme sensory enjoyment, even in the name of the Lord, without proper awareness, then lying on the bed of nails and extreme asceticism, just eating a grain of rice. It wasn't done correctly, right? Because anyway, this is probably a talk for another time. Anyway, the sharing of this kind of knowledge is what generated the awareness of past lives, and so Arjuna's arrow is still moving towards the transcendental because this knowledge was once imparted. Okay. So yeah, isn't that nice to think of that Krishna gave Arjuna that kind of information, that kind of momentum as a friend, not just as like a let there be light, let there be the word, It wasn't like that at all. He was cool about it. And so that, yeah, I finish up here quite particularly. I think I've made it quite clear how one can bring karma yoga. One can enter karma yoga with kind of awareness, and that awareness is what when karma is mixed with dharma, then there is like an eternality. The reward comes and it's continued to be given, and this could continue on for eternity, even without the material bindings. That's the kind of knowledge that one gains. Chapter 4, verse 24. A person who is fully absorbed in Krishna consciousness is sure to obtain the spiritual kingdom because of his full contribution to spiritual activities, in which the consummation is absolute, and that which is offered at the same time is of the same spiritual nature. Alright, it's not until chapter 7 when Krishna says, I am everything, and one sharpens the mentality to understand this, but what is being offered? The person doing the offering, the actual offering itself, what Srila Prabhupada then begins to talk about as the performer of the ritual, the action, in terms of, a bit more of an intimate kind of connection with Krishna. Everything becomes spiritualized. Even the consummation itself is a spiritual action. So this doesn't mean to renounce any action because a reward is coming or a kind of wave is coming back. We have to look at that to see if it's being done correctly or not. The same type of effort is applied. These are all things that Buddha has understood. Once that is coming back, it's like, okay, now I know how to continue and build upon. And so the karma yoga in the next chapter is expounded. Outwardly performing but inwardly detached. Outwardly performing but inwardly detached. Outward, there seems to be an action. Inward, there is no action. As Krishna says, he who sees inaction, An action in action is wise. Our actions are supposed to take us further away from the material instead of further binding us, okay? Whatever action that may be. This is chapter 4, Transcendental Knowledge. It's here rather than out there, okay? Hopefully that talk wasn't too out there. 15 minutes is pretty good. I'd like to thank you all for tuning in. There's been a steady incline, you know? 7 people to 10 people liking and about 60 views last week, so that's good stuff. This is good stuff. The Dharma is good in the beginning, good in the middle, good in the end, so stay tuned and see you next week. Hurry on.